Here's something wild. We have the Greek Zeus, the Roman Jupiter, and the Hindu, and I'm sorry I'm going to butcher this name, Daos, all have the exact same name etymologically. They're literally the same god, just separated by thousands of miles and years of cultural evolution. My name is Jason, and I've written over 20 fantasy books, and I like to explore how different mythologies can intersect and interact, especially in fiction. Today we're covering World Mythology 101, a tour through the greatest stories that humanity has ever told. We've got the thunder gods of Europe to the trickster spirits of Africa, the feathered serpents of Mesoamerica to the divine emperors of Japan. And these aren't just old stories, they're foundational on how we still tell stories today. So let's dive in. First, I'm going to give you a taste of all of the major mythologies, starting with probably the most famous in the West, which is Greek mythology. In the beginning, there was only chaos. From this void came Gaia, the earth, who then gave birth to Uranus, the sky. They had children, the monstrous Cyclopes and the Hundred-Handers, and then the far more beautiful Titans. But Uranus was a terrible father. He hated his children and imprisoned them deep within the earth. Gaia, in her agony, forged a sickle and gave it to her youngest son, Cronus. He used it to overthrow his father, taking his place as the king of the cosmos. But a prophecy warned him that he too would be overthrown by his own child. So, one by one, as his wife Rhea gave birth, Cronus swallowed each of his children whole, all except the last one, Zeus. Rhea tricked Cronus by giving him a stone wrapped in cloth, and she hid Zeus on the island of Crete. When he grew up, Zeus returned, forcing his father to regurgitate his siblings, and led a 10-year war against the Titans. The Olympians eventually won, and Zeus became the new king of the gods, ruling from Mount Olympus with his lightning bolt in hand. But the age of heroes and monsters had only just begun. Now a taste from Norse mythology. Far to the north, the world was colder and the stories were darker. Norse mythology is defined by one single chilling fact: everything has an end. The world of men is called Midgard, the world of the gods, Asgard. And holding it all together is the great world tree Yggdrasil. The gods of Asgard, the Aesir, are led by Odin, the Allfather, who sacrificed his eye for wisdom and hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights to learn the secrets of the runes. His son is Thor, defender of mankind, wielder of the hammer Mjolnir, eternally fighting the giants of Jotunheim. And then there is Loki, the trickster, a being of chaos who is both the gods' greatest ally and their deadliest enemy. But all their struggles, all their victories are just a prelude to the inevitable end, Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. An age of axes, an age of swords, a final battle where Thor will fight the world serpent. Odin will be swallowed by the great wolf Fenrir, and the world tree itself will burn. Almost everyone dies. But this ending wasn't entirely a story of despair, because after the fire and flood, a new world is prophesied to rise from the ashes, and a new generation of gods would rule. But far away in the fertile lands of the Nile, the story wasn't about an ending, but about an endless cycle of death and rebirth. The beloved god king Osiris ruled over a golden age of peace and prosperity. But his brother Set, the god of chaos and the desert, was consumed by jealousy. Set tricked Osiris, trapping him in a beautiful chest and cast him into the Nile. Osiris's devoted wife Isis, a goddess of powerful magic, searched tirelessly for her husband's body. When she found it, Set discovered her, and in a rage, he tore Osiris's body into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Undeterred, Isis traveled the land, gathering every piece of her husband. With her magic, she reassembled him and, for a brief moment, brought him back to life, just long enough to conceive a son, Horus. Osiris then descended to become the king of the Duat, the underworld. Horus grew up to challenge his uncle for the throne, and after a series of brutal battles, he defeated chaos and became the rightful king of Egypt, with every pharaoh claiming to be his living incarnation. Next, we have Celtic mythology. Across the misty islands of Ireland and Britain, the border between our world and the next was quite thin. You could walk into a forest and stumble into the other world, a realm where time flowed differently and the gods lived. These gods were called the Tuath de Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. They were a race of magical beings who arrived in Ireland on a cloud of mist, bringing with them great wisdom and 4 legendary treasures. Their leader was the Dagda, the good god, a father figure who carried a club that would both kill and restore life, as well as a cauldron that never ran empty. But they also had fearsome figures like the Morrigan, a phantom queen of war who could appear as a beautiful woman or a crow, foretelling doom on the battlefield. The Celts didn't see their gods as distant beings, but as powerful neighbors living just beyond sight, in a world that mirrored our own, where magic was as real as the turning of the seasons. Next, we have Mesopotamian mythology. In the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, the world's first cities rose, and with them the world's first written epic. It's the story of Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. He was 2/3 god and 1/3 man, impossibly strong and unbearably arrogant. The people cried out to the gods for relief, so the gods created a companion for him, Enkidu, a wild man who lived among the animals. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fought, and when neither could defeat the other, they became the closest of friends. Together they went on great adventures, slaying monsters and defying the gods, but their arrogance had a price. The gods decreed that Enkidu must die. Stricken with grief and terrified by his own mortality, Gilgamesh embarked on his final quest, a journey to the ends of the earth to find the secret of eternal life. What he found instead was a harder truth, that immortality is not for mortals, and the only thing that truly lasts are the stories and the walls we build. By the way, I don't use sponsors or run ads that interrupt these videos because the channel is completely self-funded. I do have one thing that I think you'll like though, which is my fantasy all-access library. It's this huge shared universe I've built where all of these mythologies actually coexist together. And it's where you can get all of my mythology-inspired fantasy books, which is how I'm able to keep making these videos. If that sounds interesting, you can check the link down below. Now let's get into African mythology. Throughout much of West Africa, if a story was being told, there was a good chance it involved Anansi the spider. Anansi is the ultimate trickster. He's clever, lazy, greedy, and a total underdog. In one famous story, he decided he wanted to own all the stories in the world, but they all belonged to Naim, the sky god. Naim told Anansi he could have the stories, but only if he completed a series of impossible tasks. He had to capture a swarm of hornets, a great python, and a fierce leopard. Using nothing but his wits, Anansi accomplished them all. He told the hornets it was about to rain and tricked them into flying into a gourd for safety. He tricked the python into letting himself be tied to a branch to prove how long he was. And he dug a pit for the leopard to fall into. Anansi brought his prizes to the sky god, who was so impressed that he made Anansi the god of all stories. Anansi's tales are not just about a clever spider, they are stories of how intelligence can win against brute force. Now let's go over to Hindu mythology. Hindu mythology operates on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend. Time isn't linear, it's cyclical, moving in vast aeons called yugas. The entire cosmos is just a dream in the mind of the god Vishnu. The functions of the universe are overseen by three great gods. We've got Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. But this destruction isn't an evil act, it's a necessary clearing away of the old to make way for the new. To maintain cosmic balance, Vishnu descends to Earth in various forms or avatars whenever evil threatens the world. He came as the hero king Rama to defeat the demon king Ravana in the epic Ramayana. He came as Krishna, a divine prince and philosopher, to deliver the sacred text, the Bhagavad Gita, on the battlefield. These aren't just stories, they are complex philosophical systems about duty, reality, and the nature of the self. But let's go back north again to Slavic mythology. In the forests and plains of Eastern Europe, the world was locked in an eternal struggle. Up in the heavens lived Perun, the mighty god of thunder and lightning who wielded a great axe, very similar to Thor. Down in the underworld lived his nemesis Veles, the god of cattle, commerce, and the watery depths. Veles would constantly steal from Perun, sometimes his cattle, sometimes his wife, sometimes even his son. Enraged, Perun would chase Veles across the sky, hurling lightning bolts down at him. Veles would transform into different animals to escape, but Perun would always strike him down. The fall of Veles to the underworld brought the rains that fertilized the earth. This wasn't just a story about two gods fighting, it was the explanation for storms, for the changing of the seasons, and for the fundamental cosmic battle between the high, dry heavens and the low, wet underworld. Next, we get into some of my favorites in Eastern mythology, starting with Chinese mythology. In the heavens of Chinese mythology, there is a bureaucracy that mirrors the earthly empire and is ruled by the Jade Emperor. But some of the most beloved stories are about those who defied this order for the good of humanity. Once a great drought plagued the land, the crops withered, and the people were starving. The four dragons, who are the long dragon, the yellow dragon, the black dragon, and the pearl dragon, saw their suffering and took pity on them. They flew to the Jade Emperor and begged him to send rain. The emperor agreed, but then got distracted and forgot his promise. Seeing that the people were about to die, the dragons decided to take matters into their own hands. They scooped up water from the sea and sprayed it over the land, saving the people. But this was a grave crime. The Jade Emperor was furious and had the 4 dragons imprisoned under 4 mountains for eternity. But the dragons didn't regret their actions, and they transformed themselves into the 4 great rivers of China, continuing to water the land forever. Next, we have Japanese mythology. Now, the entire Japanese imperial line claims descent from a single powerful goddess, Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun. But her power once almost left the world for good. She had a brother named Susanoo, the god of storms, who was wild and destructive. In a fit of rage after a quarrel, he destroyed Amaterasu's sacred rice fields and desecrated her holy weaving hall. Horrified and shamed, Amaterasu fled and hid herself in a cave, sealing the entrance with a boulder. The world was plunged into total darkness. The other gods were desperate, so they came up with a plan. They hung a beautiful mirror on a nearby tree, and the goddess of merriment began to dance so wildly and comically that all the gods roared with laughter. Curious about the noise, Amaterasu peeked out of the cave. She saw her own brilliant reflection in the mirror, and captivated by her own light, she stepped out. The other gods quickly sealed the cave behind her, and the sunlight was restored to the world. The story is a powerful reminder of how easily chaos can extinguish light, and how community and a little cleverness can bring it back. Next, we have Korean mythology. The story of Korean's founding begins in the heavens. Hwangryung, the son of the Lord of the Heavens, longed to live on earth among mortals. His father granted his wish, and Hwangryung descended upon a mountaintop with 3,000 followers to rule the world with wisdom and justice. At this time, a bear and a tiger lived in a cave together, and they prayed with Hwangryung to be made human. He gave them a challenge. They were to stay in the cave for 100 days, eating only sacred garlic and mugwort. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a great deal to me. The tiger gave up, but the bear persevered. After the trial, she was transformed into a beautiful woman. She prayed for a child, so Hwangryung took her as his wife, and she gave birth to a son named Tangun. Tangun grew up to establish the first Korean kingdom, Gojoseon, in 2333 BC. And apologies to anyone, because I am probably butchering a number of these names here. This story goes beyond just being a fairy tale. It's a national foundation myth of Korea, a story about the union of the divine and the earthly. But also in the East, we have Polynesian mythology. The people of Polynesia were the greatest navigators the world has ever known, especially back then, sailing across a vast ocean to settle thousands of islands. Their myths are filled with the spirit of the sea and the power of creation. And the greatest of their heroes was the demigod Maui. He was a trickster and a problem solver. He lassoed the sun to slow it down and give people longer days. And with a magical fish hook, he pulled the entire island up from the bottom of the ocean. But while Maui may have raised the land in Hawaii, the one who created it was Pele, the goddess of volcanoes. She is the goddess of fire, lightning, and destruction, whose volcanic eruptions literally built the Hawaiian Islands. They say she still lives in the crater of Kilauea, a raw creative force that is always building and always destroying. But now let's move over to the Americas, starting with Native American mythology in North America. Now there are hundreds of different Native American mythologies, each unique to its culture and land. In the tradition of the Cherokee people, for example, the world began as a great sea of water under a sky where all the animals lived. It was getting crowded, so they sent the water beetle down to see what was below. He dove to the bottom and brought up a bit of soft mud, which began to expand in every direction, becoming the island that we call Earth. The land was still soft, so the great buzzard was sent down to dry it. As he flew, his wings struck the ground, creating the valleys, and when he lifted them, he created the mountains. These stories show a deep connection to the land, where the very features of the landscape are the result of divine action. Moving a little further south, we have Mesoamerican mythology. Now, the civilizations of Mesoamerica, like the Maya and the Aztec, believed the universe had been created and destroyed multiple times. Their myths were deeply tied to astronomy and their complex calendars. One of the most important deities was Quetzalcoatl, or Kukulkan to the Maya. He was the feathered serpent, a god who represented the union of the earth, the serpent, and the sky, the feathers. He was a creator god, a bringer of culture and knowledge, and according to one Aztec myth, after the previous world was destroyed, Quetzalcoatl journeyed to the underworld to retrieve the bones of the people who had died. He brought them back to the world of the living, ground them into a powder, and shed his own blood on them to give them new life, creating the human beings of the current age. Now, further south still, in South America, we have high in the Andes Mountains, the Inca Empire, which built a civilization that was deeply connected to the sun. Their primary deity was Inti, the sun god, and the Inca emperor himself was believed to be a direct descendant of the Inti. The founding myth of their capital, Cusco, tells of Inti sending his son and daughter Manco Capac and Mama Oclo to the earth. They emerged from Lake Titicaca carrying a golden staff. Inti told them to travel until they found a place where the staff would sink easily into the ground. After a long journey, they reached a valley where the staff sank. This was the place chosen by the sun god, and there they founded the city of Cusco and taught the local people the arts of civilization, farming, and weaving. Next, we have Abrahamic mythology. A completely different kind of story emerged from the deserts of the Middle East, one that would change the world forever, the Abrahamic faiths, known primarily as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And these faiths introduced a radical idea that there was not a pantheon of gods, but only one all-powerful God. This God wasn't just another force of nature, he existed outside of nature and created the entire universe. The foundational story is that of Abraham, a man asked by God to leave his home and his people and travel to a new land, with the promise that he would become the father of a great nation. This relationship, based on a covenant or promise between the divine and humanity, became the basis for a worldview centered on faith, law, and a linear sense of history moving toward a final judgment. Last but not least, I like to include the Arthurian Legends, which are more of a legend than mythology, and it wasn't born in the ancient world, but in the pages of medieval literature. The story of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table is a blend of Celtic folklore and Christian ideals, which is one of the things that makes it so interesting to me. It's the story of Arthur, the boy who pulled the sword from the stone to become King of Britain. He established the utopian court of Camelot, where his knights sat as equals around a round table, sworn to uphold justice and protect the innocent. Guided by the wizard Merlin, they fought monsters and evil knights. The greatest of them, like Lancelot, Galahad, and Gawain, embarked on the ultimate quest, the search for the Holy Grail. But this perfect kingdom was doomed from the start, brought down not by an outside enemy, but by human flaws, by jealousy, betrayal, and a forbidden love between Lancelot and Queen Guinevere. Arthur's story is a tragedy, a legend of a golden age that was lost, but with the lingering promise that the king would one day return when his people needed him most. So why do these stories from cultures that had no contact with each other feel so similar? Scholars call this comparative mythology. You'll see universal patterns or archetypes repeated everywhere. There's the hero's journey from Gilgamesh to Luke Skywalker, where a hero goes on an adventure, wins a decisive victory, and comes home changed. There are flood myths in over 200 cultures, from the Epic of Gilgamesh and the story of Noah to tales from indigenous tribes in the Americas. It might be a shared memory of rising sea levels after the last ice age, or just a powerful metaphor for wiping the slate clean. You also see the same character types everywhere. We have the trickster, for example, like Loki, Anansi, and Maui. The trickster is a figure who breaks the rules and brings chaos, but in doing so, often creates change or brings wisdom. The Skyfather god, like Zeus, Odin, and Perun, is a powerful, often thunderous figure who represents order and authority. The Earth Mother goddess, like Gaia, represents fertility and nature. These patterns suggest that all humans, no matter where or when they live, are trying to answer the same fundamental questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? And what happens when we die? Mythology is the beautiful, complex, and imaginative library of answers that humanity has created for itself. So if you love these stories as much as I do, and you want to see them clash and coexist in a modern fantasy world, I'd like to invite you to my Fantasy All Access library. It's a community we have on a platform called School. And when you join, you get my entire library of ebooks and audiobooks, plus at least one new novel every single month. We also do weekly live calls where you can just hang out and talk about nerdy subjects like mythology, writing, fantasy, whatever, with me. And it's the only thing I promote because it's how my team and I fund this channel and continue telling these amazing stories. The link is in the description if you want to check it out.